Now, ceasefires are definitely tricky, right? Like May 10th, which was this past Sunday, was the first anniversary of the ceasefire between India and Pakistan. And for 4 days, both countries had the world's attention. And the region, moved through drones, missiles, disinformation campaigns, everything that we've sort of talked about in, the second and third episodes of our season. But it's suddenly stopped when there was like a full and immediate ceasefire that was reported. But the ceasefire to me raised two larger questions. The first is, why do India and Pakistan repeatedly pull back from the brink and never fully resolve the conflict itself? And is that pattern unique to South Asia, or are we seeing similar forms of, armed peace that emerge elsewhere in the world?
Sahar, I don't know if I have the answer, but I do know that ceasefires increasingly look less like endings and more like strategic pauses. They buy time, they reduce immediate escalation, but they rarely resolve the underlying political dispute. And in many ways, South Asia has been living in that condition for decades.
I mean, definitely. Let's start with May 2025. I mean, the crisis began after the terrorist attack in Pahalgam in Indian administered Kashmir, which killed 26 civilians. But did it really begin then? I mean, some people have argued that the terrorist attack was inspired by a speech that Field Marshal Asim Munir, who was, in 2025, simply known as the Chief of Army Staff, he made a speech in which he referred to Kashmir as Pakistan's jugular vein.
Honestly, it's hard to know for sure.
I mean, fair enough. I think it's also important to remember that there was a decline in terrorist attacks, right? Thanks in large part to the fencing of the line of control by the Indian security forces and the success of the ceasefire agreement, or CFA as it's known. Now, negotiations had actually led to the CFA in 2021, and it came into effect in 2023. Of course, the CFA is dead now, but both India and Pakistan, launched their military operations with such fanfare, but after 4 days, the conflict was over. And there was no peace agreement or formal negotiations. And instead, the conflict de escalated through, familiar combination of international pressure, military signaling, mutual recognition of escalation risks. And even the United States, Gulf states, and other external actors, they reportedly pushed both sides towards restraint. And both militaries, at least in my mind, appear to recognize that continued escalation could produce outcomes neither side could fully control, especially once strategic infrastructure and air bases became vulnerable.
And Sahar, that's important because to me, 2025 ceasefire was not built on trust. Rather, it was built on fear, fear of escalation, fear of uncertainty, and fear of what comes next.
Really? Fear? Neither the Indian military nor the Pakistani military seemed fearful to me. Rather, they seemed more than happy to escalate. And in my view, technology seemed to empower them to climb that escalation ladder.
Halima, publicly, yes, both sides seemed happy to escalate. And I actually think those two things can coexist. Technology may have made escalation easier, faster, and politically attractive, especially because precision strikes and drone operations can create the perception of controlled escalation, right? Both sides seemed confident and happy they could calibrate without triggering all out war. But behind that confidence, I still think fear was there, not fear of fighting itself for sure, but fear of losing control over speed and consequences of conflict. And I think that's what ultimately mattered in May 2025. Once military infrastructure, air defenses, and command facilities became vulnerable, both sides were suddenly operating in an environment where miscalculation became much more dangerous. So the technology that was empowering then ultimately was compressing decision making timelines and increasing the uncertainty about what the other side might do next. In those terms, when ceasefire wasn't necessarily a product of only restraint or trust, it was a recognition of escalation. Uh, it was a recognition that escalation had become harder to predict and therefore harder to contain.